It's a day full of news today for the ANC. We're going to stay on it for a bit longer with some analysis. We're joined on the line right now by political analyst Dr. Somadoda Fikeni. Dr. Fikeni, thank you for joining us. Let's start with the economic aspects of the ANC manifesto. Does it cover and give solutions to problems faced by many South Africans, especially in the critical areas which are jobs, poverty and infrastructure?
Well, I do think that the policy itself is quite comprehensive, but it doesn't come up with any radical solution to the challenges. It's more of an incremental approach, which simply hopes on bigger investments and also over time the economic improvement. It is not on the same range as your Marshall Plan in the post-World War period or a New Deal in the post-Depression period. So that in itself, I do think that is a plan that can only work over time, incrementally, rather than drastically.
So now, given what you've just told us about the fact that it can work incrementally rather than drastically, what are the chances of success?
The biggest challenge over the years has always been the state capacity and the leadership capacity to implement, because some of the policies are quite decent policies, except that they have not seen implementation through. And the other biggest challenge is the one of succession, which is always poorly managed. There is no succession planning, and very often, even if people are from the same political party, when they are removed, their policies are abandoned, and the country has to start fresh again. RDP faded away as GEAR came in, and GEAR faded away together with the African Renaissance as the new leadership came in. And the billions you spend in promoting a policy and the billions you spend to dismantle it and bring a new one is the one that doesn't create any major impact over time.
Now, what would you suggest as offers from yourself? What would you suggest as solutions to this particular manifesto? How do you fix it?
The biggest thing I would focus on is the capacity of the state, the capacity of leadership, but also focus as much as possible on your small to medium businesses, because they are the ones which have the greatest capacity to employ large numbers because of their labor intensity. I would also focus on education, because over time, human capital is key to sustain anything of an economic growth. I would also focus on making sure that some of the land in the hands of the state and the land that is not being actively used is immediately released to people, because some people do have capital, but they do not have assets. And I would work with the banking sector or even transform it to make sure that they are able to give credit to some of the businesses in order to have, a greater possibility of accessing fees. And lastly, tourism and agriculture are the ones which are most labor intensive, and they can absorb labor at the shortest possible time. I would focus on those.
Okay, now let's move on to the biggest story of the day. The allegations of rape have surfaced against the ANC spokesperson Zizi Kodwa, and we cannot run away from the fact that it's election time. Any bad publicity might have an impact on the votes. Now, what impact are we likely to see from these allegations in this particular incident?
Well, I do think that it is not just the Zizi Kodwa story, but it would be a cumulative effect of many stories which have been coming around sexual harassment within the ANC, which is also reflective of a society itself. Because at this stage, the issue of violence against women is such a sensitive matter, and it's such a widespread crisis, that any entity that doesn't seem to take it seriously or act fast will be negatively impacted. That is why ANC ought to make sure that they move swiftly whenever such allegations come.
Now, the Sexual Harassment Committee that the ANC has set up seem to have simply just said handed this process over to the legal fraternity. It seems as if they've washed their hands of this.
I do think that they cannot afford to wash their hands off without at the same time doing something, because they ought to suspend the individual until his, name is cleared, if at all. At the same time, the law enforcement involvement is equally important, because in the previous case of Pulemabe, when their internal processes seemed to absolve him, there was quite, a very negative, clash, negative flashback.
Yes. So now the Kodwa allegations have prompted a trial by media rather than a legal process. Would you say this is healthy for our democracy?
Well, I do think that it is always a challenge in all societies, because in nowadays social media and mass media on its full scale is the one that tend to allow the public to exercise their voice and make sure that at that given time you do have people who will comment on the case. What is most important is to stay the course and do the right thing.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your comments and your analysis and your insight. That was political analyst Dr. Somadoda